Good morning and welcome to Veterans Heartbeat on the Pulse of the Veteran, where we discuss issues of health, happiness, opportunity, and well-being of interest to the veteran community, their families, and the community who honors them.
Good morning and welcome to another episode of Veterans Heartbeat, brought to you by River, the Rural Institute for Veterans Education and Research. My name is Jason Zencraft. My co-host Ed Lisofsky is here with me, and he is the Executive Director of River. We welcome you to a weekly wide-ranging discussion of issues, events, opportunities, and needs in our veteran community. Morning, Ed. How you doing?
Morning, Jason.
We'd also like to thank our sponsor, Farside Signs. They create amazing-looking vehicle graphics that will drive traffic to your business. They are located at 1526 South Avenue West in Missoula. Follow them on the web, Instagram, and Facebook, or just stop on by.
This morning, we have Congressman Jack Burkman online with us. He's going to be here talking to us in Missoula at the Veteranpreneur event at the Holiday Inn. Good morning, Congressman.
Good morning. Great to be with you guys.
Now, do you want to be called Congressman or General?
Well, actually, I prefer to be called Jack, but my colleagues, when I first got here 16 months ago, asked me the same question. We decided after me ask them a few questions that they felt more comfortable calling me General.
Well, that's the general consensus here as well. So, Jack, I understand that you have a pretty outsized role when it comes to the Veterans Affairs Administration. Can you kind of explain what you do in Congress?
Well, I'm on three committees, Budget, Natural Resources, and Veterans Affairs, but I'm one of the very few freshmen to have a gavel. And so I'm a subcommittee chairman on oversight and investigation for the Veterans Affairs Committee, and it gives me an opportunity to dig deeply into all sorts of different issues when it comes to Veterans Affairs and how they're providing services, health care, and benefits in general for the veterans of our country who, hey, they've earned it, they deserve it. Now, let's get the services provided.
So when someone in Montana, and I hear this a lot, makes a complaint that, hey, I have to travel so far, they can only see me this day, it's too distant, those sorts of things, they end up on your desk eventually?
They will end up probably on my desk through the, if you will, the committee process. And I hate to use the word process, but the bottom line is if they just ended up on my desk right away, chances are that I'd send them to somebody else's desk to rack and stack them and prioritize them so we could, hold a hearing, dig into things, and just get the right people lined up here to answer the question.
One quick question, and then I'll just stop talking, because I know you guys have important, smart questions. But just procedurally, you're on the Veterans Affairs Committee for the House. I know there's a Senate committee. One of our senators, John Tester, is on that committee. Do these two organizations, the Senate and the House, do they talk to each other much on this particular issue, or is it fairly distant? What's the relationship like?
We do talk, and most of the discussion, regardless of the committee, is at the staff level. The staffs talk every day, and then the senators or the representatives also talk on them. And, we hold, usually it's in the March timeframe. We just finished our joint Senate and House Veterans Committee hearings that we do every year in the March timeframe where we have different groups, largely the VSOs, the Veteran Service Organizations, come in over a period of days and testify before a joint committee.
Congressman, this is Ed. Question for you. I got to know Secretary Shulkin, and I thought he had a lot of integrity. And I think the big issue that happened with him is the fact that he really wasn't supporting any private care with the VA. What's your opinion on the new secretary coming in? Do you think, is that a big issue?
Well, as you know, our country, nor any department or any entity in our country doesn't rise and fall on one person. However, when you do step into a leadership role, you have to be ready to stand up and lead. And I thank Secretary Shulkin for his service because he had the unenviable task of dealing with one of the most entangled bureaucracies that exists in the federal government. So when Admiral Jackson comes in, he is going to have the same task. The question is that when you bring someone in, what background do they have to do the job? And I'm looking forward to meeting Admiral Jackson, just to we'll probably have a little one-on-one in my office or his office for us to get to know one another, because we will be partners of sorts in the committee, helping him do his job, being part of the solution, but not being in the way, because you have to let leaders lead. But in that same time frame or that same vein, leaders must step up to lead against those opposing forces. And one might say any entrenched bureaucracy is a ready-made opposing force.
Yeah, we face that here at the Institute with the suicide prevention programs that we work on. I've got some questions from Dr. Nelson, one of our pain management specialists. If you don't mind, if I'd read these to you, okay?
Sure.
What funds and resources are made available for alternative treatments and management of pain as doctors de-emphasize and eliminate opiates from our veterans?
Well, the answer, number one, and this is my recommended reading assignment for any of your listeners, if they're not exactly sure how the opioid crisis got to where it is, there's a book called Dreamland, written by a gentleman, Sam Quinones, written a couple of years ago. I would highly recommend it to help anyone understand how we got to where we are with opioids. Now, having said that, we know that the federal government under President Trump and his commitment to this, and on our commitment as the Congress, the first step is realizing and accepting the fact that you have an addiction problem that's related to opioids, and it's related in too many cases to prescription or overprescribing. So it's a little early to say exactly what the avenues of approach are going to be to tackling this, because that's being formed up right now at the federal government level. What I've been doing back in my district in anticipation of having the House of Representatives deal with this is, for the last 5 months now, been having what I'll call listening sessions around my district that they're by invitation only. They're the people who are boots on the ground with the issue. It's the healthcare providers, it's the law enforcement, the courts, the educators, anybody who in that little town is dealing with the addiction crisis on a daily basis. So I sought to gain information and be able to see what the reality was in our district as compared to maybe some other district that maybe have different needs, maybe a more urban or suburban district. We're very rural in northern Michigan, kind of like all of you are in Montana. We are rural pieces of the country, and we could have some different ways of dealing with this rather than a big city. So the issue here is to gather the information and then allocate resources based upon a plan, not just throwing money at a problem and then hoping a plan will evolve out of it.
Well, I gave your staffer a paper that it's the draft we have been working on for 5 years that we just got accepted to present to the International Association of Suicide Prevention in New Zealand on the 2nd of May. And it talks about this quite a bit, and I know Jason's got a couple questions for you on that. But one thing that you got to remember, you may be rural, we're frontier. I've got offices where we're serving veterans that it's a 5-hour drive for them to even get medical care.
I am curious, you had mentioned Shulkin and tangled bureaucracy as part of the reason. When it comes to that bureaucracy, how does it deal between like urban, rural, frontier kind of settings?
Or even state versus federal. We have issues right now where the state says one thing and the federal bureaucracy says another, and the veterans are getting caught in between.
Well, again, it sounds like even though we've defined your district as frontier, your area is frontier and mine is rural, we have that similar drive time. It may not be 5 hours, but in some cases it's easily 4+, especially when add in January winters up in northern Michigan.
Oh yeah.
But the idea that the federal government is the keeper and creator of all good solutions, I think we know is not true. And the more that the federal government can figure out how to get out of the way of the states when it comes to implementing whatever program it is, but in this case, let's say it's dealing with veterans and let's say it's in dealing with suicide, you have to be able to figure out where the commonalities are that transcend any type of district, and then where the differences are, where you have to make the exceptions so that whether it's Montana or Michigan can affect their programs, and so can a city like St. Louis, Missouri, and that's where the federal government will never be the genesis of good customized solutions. So we have to figure out as the federal government what's the role, and then push it down to the states, but force the bureaucracies that are in Washington, D.C. to actually focus on outcomes and that they can be held accountable.
And who does that? Who does that forcing? Is that something that the Veterans Affairs Committees are responsible for? Is it something the VA administrator is responsible for, or what?
Well, I think the enforcement piece comes from Congress holding VAs, Veterans Affairs, Veterans Administration, feet to the fire, and that's been a challenge for decades in long terms because there are entrenched bureaucracies at all levels, both local, state, and federal. I mean, you've seen them, I've seen them. And we have to make sure that no bureaucracy at whatever level decides its goals and its objectives are more important and more relevant than that of the individual veteran.
So this is Jason, the co-founder of River, and one thing we notice at the Institute is that a lot of veterans have a hard time reintegrating back into society. So I'm wondering if vocational reentry and reintegration into community is being emphasized in the Veteran Affairs Committee that you sit in on.
That responsibility for reintegration really begins as the veteran transitions out of the military, before they enter the Veterans Affairs realm, if you will. There is, when every young man or woman who joins the United States military signs an 8-year contract. And depending, that 8 years can be broken down into different segments. Could be 4 years active duty, 4 years inactive reserve, could be 2 years active duty, 6, there's all different contracts. The challenge with helping veterans reintegrate into civilian life after the military is a very, very, very there's no one-size-fits-all in that, because let's say someone joined the Montana National Guard and was deployed for a year and came back. Their family was still in the same house. They came back to their old job. They're back right there reassimilated into their normal lives. In many cases, the major challenge that veteran is going to have in that scenario is that they're going to miss the intensity of their military experience and miss their buddies in their unit. Okay? You might have that same veteran's brother or sister who enlisted and spent 4 years active duty, did multiple tours overseas, who decided not to come back to Montana after their 4 years, and they're living in California or Georgia or wherever they happen to get out, and now they don't have the family support system that their brother did, because they're out, they're not back at their home where they were raised. So that then provides some different challenges for veterans reintegrating, because now the first thing they're trying to do is build themselves a new personal support system. So the one thing that the VA and the Department of Defense can do better on, and they're working on it. They've been working on it since I was in uniform. We had what was called a little transition group to help those veterans transitioning from their Department of Defense time into the Veterans Affairs system. But in the end, as long as there are avenues available, and nowadays we do everything so much online, or the locality of CBOX, or the locality of Veteran Service Organization counseling, whether it's DAV, Vietnam Veterans of America, VFW, get on all of them. Those are locally based organizations in a lot of ways that provide an open door. But that's a long way of saying that the Veterans Affairs Committee really we are a partner, but we are not a majority partner in that reintegration of the veterans. Our goal as Veterans Affairs is to get that veteran into the system. So now when that veteran wants to apply for either GI Bill benefits, some type of health care, whatever it happens to be, that they are successfully in the system and can access the care or access the benefits.
Well, I've got a quick question, follow-up for you, General. This said, we've done a lot of crisis counseling and whatnot with Montana Army National Guard members who come back from a deployment, and the Guard had no services, no transition for them. And it's been rather interesting. It's getting better because I don't think we've had too many deployments in a while. But we had one guy who had a Purple Heart, and it took us 3 years to fight to get him his compensation. As you know very well, the National Guard is under the purview of the governor, unless it is federalized, if you will, for a specific mission or time frame. And that is how you just articulated that, is one of those challenges that, especially as it relates to suicidal ideations, the potential for suicide, that National Guardsman or that reservist comes back and is nowhere near anything military for a support base because they just went back to life and they become isolated. And isolation is one of the biggest drivers when it comes to people succumbing to the challenges of life because they feel alone. And that is something we all have to work on, regardless of military affiliation, but that feeling of isolation. Well, yeah, we see that a lot at the Institute. One of the things that we do is we feed the veterans that come in lunch, and that communal bond that eating together seems to really help quite a bit.
Yeah, another thing that we do is recreational therapy, because as you were alluding to before, two of the things that a lot of veterans miss getting out of the military is that intensity, as well as the brotherhood. So these outdoor recreation events, there's a giant group of veterans. There's that brotherhood. They can start, hashing out stories, talking, things like that. So there's that community, that sense of brotherhood. And then they're more intense. It's fishing, kayaking, things like that, especially when you can bring families into the fold as well. So then it's not this event that they have to go away from their family to enjoy. Then they start associating with leaving their family and enjoyment. But bringing them into the fold and addressing the two things when it comes to the adrenaline rush or the intensity, as well as that sense of brotherhood. Have you seen much by the way of that on the Veterans Affairs Committee?
Again, not so much in what we deal with on the Veterans Affairs Committee. Not so much, only because that the VA does not really get involved in the particulars of that. That's more left where the VA gets involved is the support and the working together with the veteran service organizations. Because in different parts of the country, you might have in one area where the American Legion is strong, you might have another area where the VFW is strong, or the different groups. So where the VA gets involved is to make sure that there is whatever support is necessary from the VA that is requested by veteran service organizations.
I had a question for you, General. It has to do with the role of the House. Obviously, purse strings, famously, the House apportions money that everybody else has to deal with. One of the things that recently passed was this omnibus bill. Large amount of money, trillions, I understand. Some of that went towards military. Did any directly affect the VA, and do you think we'll see any changes in services?
Well, in the omnibus, we did not put in the continued community care VA, which is the new version of choice. There were some issues with that. I'm sad to say that there was some partisanship in a normally bipartisan committee that we could not get that included in the bill we just voted on. But there will be the VA will continue to be funded in support of the veterans, but the challenge in doing that as Congress is to ensure that the dollar that's given to the Veterans Administration ends up going to products and services that are directly affecting the veterans, not being absorbed in bureaucratic spending. That is one of the challenges we have across the board in Washington, D.C., and other bureaucracies, too. I mean, it's not just federal. It's at state and local levels, too. You have to watch your spending and wisely allocate, limited dollars. But that's one of the rules of oversight in all the government committees, but in my case, with the Veterans Affairs, to watch closely as to how the VA, what kind of outcomes are they getting for the money that's coming into their program?
Yeah, you got to get a good bang for your buck.
You do.
We're getting our time running out here, but I do want to make an invite to you today. I know that you're going to be busy today, but I'm willing to break away from the event and take you over to the Institute and show you anything you want to see. We've got a lot of unique opportunities there that veterans are seeing. The other thing that I want to do is, you were real quick, you owned your own small business. That's
I did.
Pretty cool that you went from military to owning your own business. So it is possible.
Well, it's easily possible. And what the military gives the entrepreneur is the military gives the entrepreneur some structure, so that when you go out on your own, you have the freedom to implement your own plan, but your military experience in most cases teaches you to respect and implement the structural side of any great idea, because you have to have a plan and you have to execute the plan in order to be successful. So I'd look forward to it. If we can get over to the Institute, love to see it.
Well, thank you very much for your time this morning. We'll see you at the event, and thank you for coming online.
So thank you very much for listening to Veterans Heartbeat. We'd not be able to bring it to you without all the support of the listeners. And thank you again to Farside Signs for sponsoring the show. If you do need a unique vehicle design, swing on by and check them out. Also, thank you to our main sponsor, River. River has an array of services such as veterans-focused education, a vestibular disorder clinic, and now non-pharmaceutical treatments for pain, anxiety, and depression. Check them out on Facebook or on the web at riverofchange.org. Lastly, we'd like to show our appreciation to all of our veterans. Thank you for serving our country and keeping it safe.